Hi, it's Seavey and Perry on Culture. Todd Seavey, Gerard Perry, here at the Lockyard Bar in Brooklyn. And, a few movies this summer have evolution as a theme in one way or another. Starting with a movie that I sort of wish had done better at the box office. Edge of Tomorrow, a sci-fi movie with Tom Cruise, and in a way, it was a gamer's fantasy come true movie where time keeps being rebooted by humans or superpowered aliens, with the result that humans have to fight the same battle over and over again, each time getting a little more skilled and a little closer to killing what you might call the big boss alien. So you'd think every gamer in the country would have flocked to see this well-done, good-looking, and quite funny, intelligent sci-fi film, but no. It didn't do all that well, which must be sad for Tom Cruise. And maybe he needs to pick his projects differently, but I don't know. Even when he picks things probably inspired by his allegiance to Scientology, I think they've often been good projects. You could argue that, this century, he's picked 3 movies where he fights aliens, and 1 movie, Minority Report, where he's sort of fighting psychiatry, which probably means he picked these projects because they're, compatible with his Scientology. But I still like them.
Well, it's interesting you noted his selection of film projects, because I think Tom Cruise is one of those actors who's going through a cultural reevaluation in terms of the merit of his acting. In fact, I read a very interesting article by Amy Nicholson recently of the LA Weekly, which was published in the Village Voice, which asserts that Tom Cruise is actually a much better actor than people give him credit for, and in fact is pretty distinguished, even if you take into account his recent blockbuster action films, which was a relatively late development. She chronicles his evolution from a teen sensation in films like Risky Business through more dramatic, thoughtful roles like Rain Man, which I believe he was nominated for an Oscar in that film. Dustin Hoffman actually won because of his very well-crafted supporting role. And I do enjoy Rain Man. I don't enjoy Tom Cruise films that much. I don't dislike him because of any sort of preconceived notion or prejudice that he's just a handsome actor who goes in for big blockbuster action flicks. Because as Amy Nicholson notes, this is a relatively recent development. I just don't like his kind of anachronistic method acting, but he does. There is a dedication to craft, which I think is overlooked when a lot of people evaluate Tom Cruise films.
I guess he's always psychologically evolving, like a gamer or a Scientologist. But by contrast, speaking of big dumb action movies, what do you think of Michael Bay, who has a new movie out in the form of Transformers: Age of Extinction, because the world needed a 4th Transformers movie.
Are we up to number 4? Is that where we are in the chronology of
Indeed we are.
Transformers? That's so I don't know how to describe that. At least what's her name? Megan Fox isn't in this one.
Right, she was only in the first 2.
I never understood the appeal of Megan Fox.
I think it's primarily visual.
No, I understand she's an attractive actress, but I don't think she's that.
It doesn't add up to charisma.
She has no charisma. She has no real acting chops, and in terms of attractiveness, I look at her as kind of a slightly more attractive version of Rose McGowan before she hideously disfigured her face through plastic surgery or God knows what other procedure.
I think as a visual prop, she's well suited to use by someone like Michael Bay in the same way that 200-foot tall robots beating the crap out of each other are. I have to say, the opening shot of, I believe it was Transformers 2, where she's sort of bent over with her ass up in the air, and at first you're not even sure, what on earth could she possibly be doing in that position, and it turns out she's detailing the paint job on a motorcycle, and then you're like, okay, that sort of makes sense, and then you realize, I don't even care if it makes sense.
She doesn't strike me as a motorcycle enthusiast, or
it's just a beautiful visual gift that Michael Bay has given us, like all 4 of the Transformers movies, even when they're virtually logically incoherent. In fact, I think the best one was Transformers 3, which was in 3D and had wing-suited paratroops flying between collapsing Chicago skyscrapers while the robots are fighting. I mean, what more could you ask for visually? Plus, it's got military hardware, rock and roll, cars. I mean, it's amazing these movies don't make $8 billion a piece instead of $1 billion, really.
Well, they are very aesthetically pleasing. I guess if you were immersed in special effects, this is probably the apogee so far of visual effects artistry. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of Drive, the film, which aesthetically was
interesting.
Aesthetically it was very pleasing, and it also had a very good score and soundtrack. But otherwise, it was virtually contentless. I mean, it was probably one of Nicholas Refin's one of the worst films he ever directed.
Interesting.
In some respects.
You were probably the first person to compare the script of Drive to the script of the Transformers movies.
Well,
I will say, one low point in scripting, or just in logical coherence, I thought, was in Transformers 3, even though I'm contending that was the best of the Transformers movies.
Should it have been nominated for
clearly
an Oscar?
Clearly Best Picture. No, that might be a bit much. But there was one moment in it that I think captured how little the script matters in a Michael Bay movie, where and I didn't notice this, I have to admit, until watching Transformers 3 a second time. But there's a moment in it where like the robots are fighting and the city's blowing up or whatever, and Shia LaBeouf just suddenly screams, "Optimus!" And there's no reason. He's like not even trying to get Optimus's attention in that scene. Optimus doesn't respond.
So it's not like Stella. It's not this iconic
it's
word
like,
that's connected to
it's more like Michael Bay was probably just editing and he had a bunch of shots and he thought like, "Ooh, I would kind of like to hear Shia LaBeouf yelling right now. Here's a shot of him yelling." It really, that
is his forte.
It wasn't part of a conversation. It's like it's all just one big crazy montage. But there are worse things that have happened. And politically, you gotta like the fact that in the trailers for Transformers: Age of Extinction, they seem to have, as Hollywood sometimes does, by dumb luck, happened into a sort of libertarian vibe simply by trying to be balanced between right wing and left wing. So you figure they show the main characters being harried by government agents, and the government guys kind of look like CIA goons or something. And there's an American flag flying at the main character's homestead, and it's a farm. And they even say, "Don't mess with Texas." But at the same time, the government agents who are attacking the Transformers seem to liken them to illegal aliens. So you got that sort of left-pleasing vibe, like, "Oh, the poor Transformers need sanctuary from the government enforcers who are trying to block them from entering Texas."
I guess they're analogous to unaccompanied Honduran children flooding over the border now.
Exactly.
Like Texas Border Patrol stations.
And yet, in some ways, analogous to us all, Gerard, since shouldn't we all be able to roam the Earth's surface freely as long as we don't violate private property? And shouldn't people be able to come and go at the Lock Yard, whether they're customers or staffers, regardless of whether we're making a video?
I think they have pride of place. Yeah, well, since you bring it up, I guess this is as good a place as any to discuss the kind of slow-bore invasion of the United States by quote-unquote unaccompanied minors, which not all of them are actually minors. A lot of them are adults, but essentially upwards of, I think estimates now are 80 or 90,000 people from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are coming into the United States. There's a direct cause and effect relationship between the tens of thousands of Central American migrants coming into the United States and the Obama administration essentially saying we're virtually not going to deport anyone who comes here unless they probably unless they reproduce NFL merchandise unauthorized or perhaps go on a child molestation spree.
And I would just briefly say that, I guess long run, I would abolish all governments and thus all borders, but I admit this is not the most organized way to do it. Similarly, sometimes I think vegans and animal welfare activists will win in the long run, in that the richer and more technologically sophisticated we get, the less we'll need to exploit other species. But an armed, machine gun wielding guerrilla uprising is probably not the proper way for apes to take over the planet. But that's what they do in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And, I wasn't that crazy about the preceding film, which was essentially a remake of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, for those who remember the old movies. So the last Planet of the Apes movies, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, felt like it was a little too slow. The gorillas struck me as being, or the apes, I should say, struck me as being a little too smart. Like they were already doing detailed sign language and conveying complex messages, which like even Coco the gorilla doesn't actually do. Before they were even exposed to the virus that supposedly boosts their intelligence, and James Franco is creepy. More creepy than a gorilla.
But isn't he always creepy? Is that a marked departure from?
See, I'm not sure he's supposed to be. I think we just
in the context of the role, you mean?
In the role, he's supposed to be the good guy. I think he just is a creepy guy. I don't know, but anyway, even if you're a creepy actor in a mediocre film, I think you've got a sort of moral obligation sometimes to sell things. It may sound weird to say that advertising is a moral obligation, but, show some commitment to the project. And he didn't really like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, so when he went around doing media appearances and they'd ask him, like, so what do you think of your new movie? He'd say stuff like, it's a project that I did. It's like his heart wasn't in it. But on the bright side, he's not in the new one. So Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, you can almost watch it cold without caring about the one that had Franco in it. And now you get to see better actors like Gary Oldman, and more machine gun battles with the apes. So we're probably better off.
I don't think Franco is well suited to action-adventure films unless it's a parody of an action-adventure comedy, something like Pineapple Express, which I think is a great standalone comedy, and those are more in his wheelhouse. But the what did you say he played in a scientist who was
basically in the first one he sort of takes in a chimp whose intelligence is being boosted because he's involved with the science project that's doing the boosting, but he takes a special sort of paternal interest in that chimp, who ends up being the revolutionary leader as ape culture overcomes human culture in the first movie.
Well, I'm wondering about the distinction between these movies and the original Planet of the Apes movies in terms of the plot structure and the themes they focus on. Is there still the concern with militarization and the instinct towards war, or have they adapted new and...
I think it's safe to say they're analogous, and in fact, this might get a little complicated, but if the original films, there were 5 of them, the first 2 are supposed to take place in the distant future, and then there was one that involves time travel, and then the 4th and the 5th take place circa present day. And so in the new movies, we're actually seeing remakes of 4 and 5. So they're just starting out in the present day when the apes first revolt. So essentially, the James Franco one was a remake of number 4, which was Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, the remake being Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And the 5th in the original series was Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and that was really the one that stressed the fact that humans are warlike. So a last remaining colony of humans can't really learn to live in peace. They want to fight a war against the apes, and that's really what the current film is a remake of. The current one, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, has Gary Oldman leading the human colony in an ill-advised war against the newly dominant apes.
But if you look at it in one respect, it might actually be an evolutionary adaptation to our advantage, the fact that we are so warlike, the fact that we were able to kill other more primitive, I know it sounds horrible, but other more primitive creatures might have been intricately related to our ability to make tools and construct machines. I mean, I guess it does have its downside, but when you look at it in this context, it could be it probably was an evolutionary advantage that Homo sapiens was so violent. in some respects.
Like so much in nature, it has its pluses and minuses. Speaking of pluses and minuses, whatever people might think of other Apes films, I think the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston is one of the best films of all time. Not just best sci-fi films, I think it's one of the best films of all time. Thanks in part to Rod Serling, who wrote it, and who was no slouch. So regardless of what you think of the new one, rewatch the original sometime. Another thing that always bears repeat viewing is Scarlett Johansson. We talked about her a little in a previous video, being a near perfect being, and now she's actually playing a perfect being in Lucy. And I guess one of the important lessons of Lucy is if you have a big bag of drugs in your gut, that's the key to accessing the other 90% of your brain that supposedly, according to the film, you're not using, even though that's not science. That's just sort of a slogan.
Yeah, Hollywood biochemistry isn't always that accurate, but
kind of like Hollywood physics.
Yes.
But it gives us an excuse to see ScarJo using telekinesis and stuff. Is there anything she can't do? You figure just in the past 12 months or so, she's been an artificial intelligence program. She really helped make the Captain America sequel probably one of the best superhero movies with her return as Black Widow. And now she's a telekinetic who's accessing 10 times as much brain power as the rest of us and freaking out Morgan Freeman.
I wonder, though, if this falls into the trope of these Hollywood-created super women, the type of film starring really attractive, energetic actresses like Angelina Jolie, who's cast in this role of Lara Croft, which is based on a successful video game franchise, but otherwise. A lot of these films, they try to create this kind of mythic, almost Athena-like creature who's the focus of the film. I know it's not meant to be that realistic, obviously, but is that a danger of falling into this trope of just this amazing woman who could just destroy everything?
You mean like the practical danger might be that we'll end up with a violent matriarchy?
Perhaps. Maybe in the future, that's where we're headed.
Well, it wouldn't shock me. After all, this country might elect Hillary Clinton president. But funny thing, I didn't immediately perceive how important Scarlett Johansson was going to be. Like a lot of people, I first saw her, as far as I recall, in Ghost World, a movie based on a comic book.
Well, she was a supporting character.
Right, but she was one of the. Well, she was at least the third most important, playing the third most important character in the film. And the marketing was more built around her character and Thora Birch's than around Steve Buscemi, even though ultimately...
Well, their relationship, yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, even though some people came away from Ghost World saying, oh my gosh, that redhead teenager is so cute, I actually didn't even remember her. I just remembered, I remembered Thora Birch, who I thought was obviously more attractive, because I guess I like nerds or something. And she certainly... she's arguably curvier. Anyway,
Scarlett Johansson's filled out a little bit.
That's true. This is definitely true. So I came away from it remembering Thora Birch, and when people said, "Oh, is that the attractive woman from Ghost World?" I'd be like, "What? No, I think it's just that Scarlett Johansson's that other woman from Ghost World. I barely remembered her."
Well, to be fair, her character wasn't that she was an important protagonist, but her character wasn't that intricately plotted out. She was more there to the relationship of her and Thora Birch and the eventual schism that breaks them apart, and Thora Birch's internal development. So she wasn't, in that respect, she was one of the stars, but wasn't the star.
And
we were talking about Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, that's it.
And you were saying that their career.
I'm being a bad director.
I don't know where you were leading.
Oh, Thora Birch having orange hair. So despite appearances, or despite the aesthetic judgments of most of the populace, maybe Scarlett Johansson is actually more normal if she got average SAT scores and doesn't have porn star parents than Thora Birch is. Thora Birch may not be an every woman. She may be stranger. than Scarlett Johansson.
But I don't think she was cast as an every woman in that she kind in that role in Ghost World. She kind of prides herself on being disdainful of the common man, and I guess the archetypal scene is where she's in that movie theater and her meat-headed boss is trying to persuade her that she shouldn't engage in discourse with the customers over whether or not they really want this gelatinous, disgusting cheese.
She's a bad employee.
She is a bad...
She's telling people not to eat
well,
the food.
that's the thing I actually gleaned from that scene, believe it or not. I mean, the customer is probably going to die of some horrible diabetic complications, but even so, she's just really an awful employee,
and she's kind of a drip. Let's face it. She's like she was sort of a hipster nerd a few years too early, who's just dragging everybody else down. Man, she's really not that much fun to be around. She sneers constantly at her little town, and it's probably just as well she gets on a bus and leaves at the end. Forgive me for spoil. I should have given a spoiler warning for that, but
it's been over a decade.
Yeah, it's been a decade, and it's not really much of an ending, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It's not a bad film. It's not.
Actually, you could argue Ghost World is one of the best movies based on a comic book.
That's what I would argue. The only comic book out of... Well, look at that more as a graphic... I guess you'd call it a graphic novel if you want to distinguish it from the less...
I ain't fancy.
Yeah, but Ghost World, American Splendor, the only superhero action... comic book adaptations that I think really stand out that are required, and I know you will probably add a couple, but the Ang Lee's interpretation of the Hulk, the first two Tim Burton Batman films, but especially the original one with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, oh geez, I can't remember. But those are the three that stand out in my memory.
By contrast, one reason I'm enjoying the 21st century is that I'm happier with the recent Marvel movies. I think X-Men 2 and Avengers and the Captain America sequel and X-Men Days of Future Past, Iron Man. And over at DC.
Well, I heard that the latest X-Men film is really phenomenal from people who have seen it.
I think so. And the middle Christopher Nolan Batman movie, Dark Knight. I think these have been my favorite superhero movies of all time, even more so than the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. But we'll have more reason to talk about movies like that for years to come, probably. So watch more Seavey and Perry on Culture, please.
Farewell.